My name is Blanche Whitmore. I'm 68 years old. I've been a widow for 9 years, and I live alone in a simple house in Raleigh, North Carolina. I have always been a quiet woman, one of those who prefers the sound of the wind in the trees to the sound of a loud television. But there is a question that, to this day, takes my peace of mind. How does a loving mother end up being seen only as a walking credit card? If you've ever felt like you've given everything to someone and yet you've been treated like a nuisance, so maybe this story is a mirror of yours, because there is no greater pain than realizing that the love we gave was used as a bargaining chip. I don't say this with anger. I speak with the tired heart of someone who has already understood too much too late. Today, I'm going to tell you what led my own son and his daughter-in-law to be stuck in an expensive restaurant, unable to pay the bill, and why, on that day, all the cards were blocked. By the end, you may understand what drove me to do what I did, and why sometimes a mother's silence is not giving up. It is justice. But before we dive into the heart of this story, I need you to know one thing. The moment I heard my son's message saying, distressed, that all the cards had been refused at the fancy restaurant where he dined with his wife and mother-in-law, I didn't feel guilty. I just took another sip of my black coffee and looked at the bird that landed on the same window over and over again. And if you're wondering what would make a mother like me, so generous all her life, take such an attitude. Know that nothing happens overnight. Sometimes it takes a damn phrase, said at the wrong time, to destroy an entire story of sacrifice, and that's what happened to me the night before. If you have ever been that person who has always been there, who paid, who held the ends, and yet was treated as invisible, so stay here with me. I only ask you this. If this story touches your heart, if it looks like yours or someone you love, leave your like, subscribe to the channel. Sometimes we just need to know that we are not alone in what we feel. This is not just a video, it's an outburst. And each support, no matter how small, gives me the courage to tell what hurts so much in silence. I had just buried John when Ryan showed up at my door, with that look between guilt and haste. It's only for a month, Mom, until I get something firm, just so as not to delay the rent. I didn't even think twice. I handed him the card and said I trusted him. It was my son, and I was still too heartaching to deny anything. But that 1 month turned into 3 years. 3 years in which the card never came back to my wallet. Every time I asked if he had already found a permanent job, he answered with promises, justifications, and future plans. And every time I saw a purchase on the statement with an expensive store name, I pretended it wasn't that expensive, that maybe he had used just a little bit, that maybe Dana had paid in cash. Dana. At first, I thought she was just a little too vain. Then I realized that she was thirsty. Thirst to appear, to shine, to be seen as someone important. She said she needed to invest in herself, in her image as a digital presence consultant. He started with new clothes. Then came the professional photo shoots, the events in Atlanta, the boutique hotel stays, all with the card that bore my name. It's only until my career kicks in, she said. You are amazing for believing in me. We will give back everything. I wanted so much to believe. She was afraid of looking petty, of being seen as that bitter mother-in-law who only thinks about money. Then I smiled, and he paid. When I saw it, their Tesla entry had come out of my savings account, and I wasn't even consulted. Ryan said it was safer to transport Dana's dog, a dog I didn't even know. They laughed, saying that he was a 4-legged grandson, and I smiled with a tightness in my chest. Cell phone plans have increased. One day I went to the operator to solve a problem and found out that I paid for 6 lines, including Dana's mother's. When I questioned him, Ryan said, "Oh, she was struggling. It was just to help for a few months." I was silent. That was becoming routine. I watched Dana's posts on Instagram, trips to Palm Springs, brunches with mimosa glasses, new looks every week. And you know what hurt the most? In no photo, no birthday, no celebration, I was there. One day, by chance, I met the manager of Bay Ridge Bistro, a fancy restaurant where they lived by checking in at the chains. I went there to buy a gift voucher. When I said my name, he smiled and said, "Oh, you're the mother of the golden card. Gold card." That's what they called me. It hurt me. It hurt me more than I can explain. I was the old woman in the card, not the mother, not the grandmother, not the woman who stayed up all night sewing costumes for Ryan when he was little. I was just the password in the banking app. There was a night when I sat on the edge of the bed and did the math. All I had paid for in the last few years. The dinners, the gifts, the tuition, the streaming services, even the yoga class with a private instructor. The value was high, but what weighed most was not money. It was silence. Oblivion. And I asked myself, would they notice if I disappeared? Or would they only miss it when the bill was not paid? Allow me to pause here. Sometimes we give ourselves so much for others that we forget to look if there is reciprocity. And when he finally looks, what he finds is absence, neglect, coldness. If you've ever experienced something like this, if you felt like you were too generous with those who just wanted to take from you, comment below. He writes, "I've lived it," or "It's true," or whatever comes out of his heart. Sometimes it's good to know that we're not alone in what we feel. And it was in this climate of doubt and silent pain that I began to realize something was very wrong, but the worst was yet to come. Because what I heard the next night, it was like a slap in the face. And that's what made me get out of bed and do something they would never have imagined. Can you guess what was said? That's that. Even I couldn't believe it. I remember one Mother's Day in particular. Ryan sent me flowers by app, white roses, accompanied by a printed note that said, "We love you." I thanked him for the message, with a little heart. That night, I made a simple sandwich and ate it alone, sitting on the porch. I was already used to the absence, but it still hurt. The next day, while checking my statements, a habit I learned after so many scares, I saw a charge of $342 at Bay Ridge Bistro. The date and time coincided with the matriarch tribute dinner that Dana posted on Instagram. It was a set table, candles, fine plates, but the matriarch in question was not there, and yet he was the one who paid. I, the old woman with the card, I began to notice that this was repeated. Birthdays, achievements, events, all of them celebrated by Ryan and Dana with pomp and presents. My presence on the statement. Once at Christmas, they did a family-themed photo shoot. Matching dresses, illuminated tree, forced laughter. They sent me a copy, already framed. I appeared only in the dedication. With affection from our family to you. I, who was 240 kilometers away, with a frozen supper and the radio on very quietly. There was another dinner that was marked in my memory. I went to Bay Ridge for the first time. I wanted to buy a gift card for my neighbor's wedding anniversary, Mrs. Evelyn. When I said my name at the reception, the waiter smiled and said, "Ah, you are the mother of the golden card. It's good to finally meet you." I couldn't answer. I felt a pang in my chest, as if something was breaking inside. I smiled out of politeness, but inside, I just wanted to disappear. I left there without buying anything, and that phrase kept hammering in my head for days. Mother of the golden card. I had stopped being a person, stopped being a mother, stopped being Blanche. It had become a walking bank, a sentimental sponsorship, but without the right to interest or gratitude. And yet, even after all this, on Christmas cards, I still smiled. Sitting in the old armchair, with a false fireplace bottom glued to the wall, I would take the timer from the camera, adjust it, and smile as if my house was full. He sent the photo with a cute phrase, "I miss everyone." And do you know what I got back? A like, a heart sticker. That's when I realized that I was a background figure in the story itself. I paid for the table, but not even the napkin was for me. And yet, I kept quiet, until that night. That blessed night when I heard the phrase that kept me up at night. Because there are things that we even swallow, but there are others that get stuck in the throat, and they never pass again. And what I heard that time, it was like a shot in slow motion. Have you ever been called useless within your own home? Because that's almost what happened. Want to know what was said? I'll tell you. But get ready, because it was at that moment that everything started to change. It was any Friday, one of those when the sun sets slowly, and the house seems suspended in time. Dana had asked me to use my office for a relaxed get-together with friends from work. She said it would be quick, just a coffee and cake, and that she would be very grateful if I could help with the table. I thought it was a gesture of approach, so I prepared everything neatly. A clean towel, porcelain teapot, homemade cookies. I stayed in the kitchen, watching from afar, as always. The house was mine, but my presence always seemed a nuisance. I waited for the right moment, grabbed the hot coffee maker, and went to the living room to serve. The conversation was lively. Loud laughter, cell phones in hand, compliments on Dana's new haircut. That's when one of the young women asked how they managed to maintain that lifestyle so easily. Travel, a new car, expensive dinners. Dana laughed, in that mocking tone she used when she thought she was being witty, and said, "Oh, we're lucky. This old woman is only good for paying the bills. If it weren't for her, we wouldn't even have a car." And then Ryan laughed, not with shame, not with discomfort. He laughed as if agreeing, like someone who always knew and never cared. I froze it with the coffee maker in my hand. The warmth of the glass in the palm didn't let me fall, but inside, I went to the ground. I stood there, standing there, as if I were out of my own body. I looked at him and didn't see my boy anymore. I saw a man who fed on my kindness as if it were my obligation. The room continued laughing. No one noticed my silence, not even him. I served the coffee as a shade. Each cup placed was a piece of what I would no longer be. When I finished, I went to the kitchen, washed my hands with cold water, and leaned against the sink, staring at nothing. The muffled sound of conversation still echoed through the house, and there I was, firm on the outside and shattered on the inside. I kept repeating that phrase in my head like a cursed echo. This old woman is only good for paying. That was not just an offense. It was the raw portrait of my position in that house, in that family. And what destroyed me was not just the phrase. It was his laugh. Because when a daughter-in-law says something cruel, we even think, she has no blood ties. But when our blood laughs, it's something else. I went to the bedroom, closed the door, and sat on the edge of the bed. I didn't even cry. There were no tears, just a heavy silence. A silence that screams. A silence of those who understood, too late, that blind love also humiliates. I stayed there until they left. When the house became empty, I heard Ryan's footsteps in the hallway. He didn't even knock on the door. I just said, "Thanks for the help, Mom," and he left for his room. Without knowing that, at that moment, I had changed inside, that something in me had died, and that another, much stronger, had just been born. And that's when everything starts to turn. Because that same night, lying in the darkness, unable to sleep, I made the first real decision in years. Want to know what it was? Get ready. Because the woman they called old woman who only serves to pay was going to show that she knew very well how to stop serving. That night, after the house had sunk into silence, I sat in the darkness of my room staring up at the ceiling. I couldn't sleep for a minute. The phrase echoed in my head like a cracked bell. This old woman is only good for paying. And his laugh, the sound of it hurt more than any words. I got up slowly, put on my slippers, and started walking around the house. Each object seemed to tell me a story that I had ignored. The picture frame with the photo of the little Ryan, dirty with cake on his 6th birthday, the rocking chair that John refurbished before he died, the closet with the family albums, which no one else opened. Everything was there, intact on the outside, but worn out on the inside, just like me. I sat down in front of the computer. I turned on the lamp and opened the bank's page. My finger trembled, not from fear but from the end. I canceled the additional cards, one by one. Afterwards, I closed the joint account, changed the passwords, revoke all the online access they had. I didn't do anything with hatred. I did it with a calmness that surprised me, like someone who cleans the house after a windstorm. I printed the last statements. I took an old folder and started to put everything away. That morning, I reviewed line by line. Amazon Prime, Netflix, HBO Max, artisanal coffee subscription, luxury gym, wine club, even a monthly fee for a guided meditation app. Everything linked to my card. Everything canceled. With each click I took, I felt as if I were pulling an invisible thread that kept me tied. When I saw it, it was almost 6 a.m. The sky was beginning to clear behind the trees in the yard. I went to the kitchen, brewed my black coffee the way I always did. Strong, unsweetened. I sat on the porch and took a deep breath. For the first time in many years, I drank my coffee without fear of the phone ringing. And when it played, I already knew what I would say. I didn't want revenge. He wanted relief, peace. And that morning, I began to remember who I was before I became a silent provider. I was a teacher for 30 years. I saw children grow up, form families, come back to thank me. I had a life before I became the mother of the golden card, and now I wanted to have a life again. I'm here opening my heart, telling my story as it is. No flourish, no lie. If you're listening to me, leave a like on this video and subscribe to the channel, because I still have a lot saved to tell you. Sometimes, all a person needs is to know that someone on the other end understands what they have been through in silence. But that was just the first dawn of many, because what comes next? Oh, honey, that's when the rope really breaks. Do you want to know how he reacted when he saw that the cards no longer worked? Well, then get ready, because lunch that Saturday became a scene that not even a movie could write. It was Saturday morning. The sun had barely passed through the curtains when my phone rang. I looked at the display and saw Ryan's name. I took a deep breath. I already knew what it was. I could already imagine the tone of voice, the despair, and she was ready, answered. On the other side, he spoke hurriedly, almost choking on the words. Mom, the cards didn't go through. We're at Bay Ridge Bistro with Dana's mom. It's humiliating. You need to solve this now. I remained silent for a few seconds. I let him speak. I let the despair overflow. And then I replied, with the calm of someone who had waited years for that moment. I have decided to stop financing your lives, Ryan. On the other side, the silence was dry, short, and then it exploded. What? Have you gone crazy? This is ridiculous. You are exposing us, in front of Dana's family. But I remained serene. I was sitting with my cup of coffee, the same coffee I had so often drank in distress, but which now warmed me like a shield. Ryan, I said, I heard what you and Dana said yesterday, and I'm no longer this old woman who is only good for paying. He was unresponsive for a few seconds. Then came what always came. It was a joke. You're exaggerating. We were going to refund you. You got it all wrong. But this time I didn't give in. No more promises, I said. Enough of you treating me like an ATM with a heart. I'm alive, Ryan, and I'm tired. He screamed a little more, accused, tried to reverse it. He said that I was destroying my own family, that it was a disproportionate punishment, but nothing hurt anymore. Nothing made me come back. For the first time, he heard a no coming out of my mouth, and for the first time, he didn't know what to do with it. I hung up the phone with steady hands. The world did not fall. The sky did not collapse. What fell there was the weight I had been carrying on my shoulders for years, a weight disguised as love. And from that moment on, he knew something had changed, but he still had no idea what would come next, because that call was just the beginning. What he didn't know yet is that what I was about to discover would change everything for good. Do you have any idea what I found when I calmly looked at the papers stored in the living room drawer? Well, prepare your heart, because there are things that not even a mother expects to see. On the afternoon of that same Saturday, shortly after the call, I heard the noise of their car stopping in front of my house. It wasn't a visit. It was an attack. The sound of the door slamming, the quick footsteps on the stone path, the doorbell ringing nonstop. I stayed at the back of the house, sitting in the laundry chair, with the door ajar to the garden. From where I stood, I could hear everything without being seen. Ryan knocked on the door hard, calling my name as if demanding, not as asking. Mom, open that door. We need to talk. His voice was choked, a mixture of anger and despair. Dana was right behind, talking loud enough for the whole neighborhood to hear. Do you want us to become a laughingstock? Ryan's mom had to foot the bill. Do you want us to look like beggars now? I looked at the clear sky, a blue I hadn't seen in a long time, and took a deep breath. As strange as it may seem, I was at peace, not out of revenge, not for pleasure, but finally, to see that, for the first time, they were facing what they had always let me carry alone, the discomfort of reality. They went around the house, tried to look out the windows, shook the back handle. Ryan ran his hand through his hair, nervous as he did when he was a teenager, and realized that he had messed up. Dana paced the courtyard, her arms crossed, her eyes rolling as if she expected me to show up with a check in her hand. You're exaggerating, she shouted, staring out of the living room window. Are you going to throw away your own family because of a conversation that wasn't even serious? I remained silent. For the first time, silence was my ally, not my punishment. That was my answer, my shield. They stayed there for more than an hour, arguing among themselves, pointing fingers at each other. Dana blamed Ryan for not avoiding the situation. Ryan blamed Dana for talking too much. And there, in that screaming outside, I realized one thing. Without my money, their love didn't seem so strong. If she doesn't open that door, we'll go back to Charlotte tomorrow, Ryan threatened, and let her get by later, alone in that house. Hearing that should have hurt, but it didn't hurt. Because at that moment, alone was the first word that made sense. No longer used, no longer manipulated. Alone, yes, but free. And it was while I watched the two trying to go around the garden that a thought came to me. The day the bank closes, everyone shows if they came for affection or for access. I know that the strongest part of this story is yet to come. If you've made it this far, stay a little longer. There is a twist that even I didn't imagine, and that's when justice began to take shape. After hours, they gave up. They got in the car and drove away. The gate slammed. The tires screeched at the exit. I remained where I was, smelling the flowers in my garden. And at that moment, I realized that I hadn't just closed cards. I had opened a door inside me, but just when I thought I was starting to turn the page, I opened an old folder and discovered something that made my world stop again. You know when you look at a paper and feel that your own signature is not yours? And that's when I understood. The story was much worse than I thought. On Monday, the phone started ringing early. Unknown number. Answered. It was Dana's mother, the one who dined at my expense without even knowing that the dish came from my retirement. She began in a sweet, almost rehearsed voice. Blanche, honey, I learned about what happened. What an unpleasant situation. Are you okay? You know, everyone makes mistakes, and I think that can all be solved with a good coffee and a frank conversation. It's not time to create a mood, right? I thanked him for his concern, said he was fine, and hung up. But that was just the beginning. In the following hours, more calls came. My late John's sister, who never called me, appeared on the display. Blanche, what are you doing? Your son is hurt. Dana is embarrassed. Do you really want to be marked as the mother who turned her back on her own family? Later, a cousin of Dana's sent me a message on Facebook. I don't even know how he found me. Just passing by to say that we are praying for you. May God give you discernment. Dana commented that you may need to take legal action if you continue to act like this. They talked about instability, but I know you're a good woman. Instability. That word hit me like an icy breath on the back of my head. I started to join the dots. I had cut the money, and now they were trying to cut my sanity. That was it. If I didn't open my hand, they would try to disqualify me, painting the image of a confused, spiteful old woman, unable to make decisions, all to justify what they were about to try. I took a sheet of paper and wrote down each name, each number, each message. I went to the file drawer where I kept old documents, and I felt my hand tremble. Because there, between forgotten contracts and insurance policies, I found copies of powers of attorney that I had signed years ago. Some I remembered. No. One of them in particular gave me a knot in my stomach, an authorization for joint bank transactions, with Ryan's signature and one of mine. Crooked, hurried. That was not recent, but it was active. I started to remember one time he asked me to sign some insurance paperwork, saying that it was just routine. I had the flu, lying down, and he brought everything ready. The pen, the page already folded where he should sign, and I, as always, signed. The penny dropped for good. It was no longer just emotional abuse. It was flat. It was construction. And now that the tap has run dry, they have started looking for another pipe. I leaned back in my chair and closed my eyes. I didn't cry, but I felt a heavy loneliness. Not that of being alone, but to realize that those we raised with so much love can, yes, turn against us because of money. Allow me to breathe with you a little. Sometimes, what hurts the most isn't the betrayal itself. It's the time it took us to see that it was already happening right under our roof. If you've been through this too, comment below. He writes, I know how it is, or I understand you, just so I know I'm not the only one. After these calls, I didn't answer any more unknown numbers, but I saved them all. I made a new folder in the closet with the records, dates, copies, new passwords. She was no longer just an old bruise. I was alert, because now I knew they were going to try to catch me where they had always underestimated me, through the mind. But they forgot one thing. When a woman learns to say no, she also learns to protect herself. But I still didn't know that their next step was already underway, and what would arrive in the mail later that week. It would leave me groundless. Have you ever received a letter that changes everything? Well, prepare your heart, because mine has arrived. The letter arrived on a Thursday, folded carefully inside a beige envelope, with no sender. I opened it calmly, as if already expecting the worst, but still hoping for a thread of good surprise. It was a warning. Dana's lawyers were assessing the emotional stability of a lady who, in their words, had been demonstrating erratic behavior, with potential asset risk to herself and her close family. My name was there, along with cold, technical legal terms, and absurdly distant from the woman I am. I folded the paper, took a deep breath, and went upstairs to my small office, where I kept all the records that had been piling up. I closed the door, turned on the lamp, and began what would be one of the hardest nights of my life. I spread the extracts on the table. 5 years of spending. One by one, I categorized everything with colored markers: food, travel, subscriptions, electronics, gifts, Tesla expenses, gyms, aesthetic treatments, designer clothes, last-minute gifts. I spent hours doing math, writing down values, checking each automatic debit. When I finished, the sum total was there, written in black pen in the corner of a crumpled sheet. $86,172.48. The number stared at me as if it had life. I felt a pang of shame, another of incredulity. How did I let this happen? I went back and reviewed my own spending in the same period. What had I bought for myself? A new sofa, 7 years ago. Other than that, basic bills, medicines, and some seedlings for the garden. Nothing more. I got up, went to the mirror, and stared at my face. A face that time had carefully shaped, but which now reflected more than wrinkles. It reflected loss, not money, of history, of belonging. I returned to the table, opened my diary, the old one, with a blue cover with worn corners, and wrote a sentence that came out of the inside like an outburst that had been stuck for years. I used my love as collateral, and they took out a loan with no intention of repaying. At that moment, it was no longer sadness that I felt. It was mourning, the mourning of someone who buries, not a body, but an illusion, that he still had a family, that she was still remembered with affection, not as a number. I closed the journal and curled up in my chair. I looked at the old photos on the shelf. Ryan, still small, hugging his father with scraped knees and a smile full of missing teeth. We were happy, or it seemed so, and I would have given everything, so that that boy would never have disappeared inside the man who graduated later. It was there, in that chair, surrounded by papers and silence, that I understood the depth of the wound. I wasn't just used. I was transformed into something functional, as if my only use in the world was to maintain a lifestyle that was never mine. And when a mother realizes that her love has become a tool, something inside her breaks forever. But the scariest thing was yet to come, because at the bottom of the box, where I kept the last documents, there was a paper that I had never seen, and as I read the first few lines, I felt my blood run cold. Have you ever felt your heart slow down, as if you knew something serious was there, before you even understood it clearly? Well then get ready, because what that document said put at risk not only my money, but my freedom. The next morning, after a bad night's sleep, I woke up different. I can't explain it exactly. It was as if, for the first time in a long time, my mind had woken up before the body. I got out of bed with a clarity that startled me. I sat on the edge, looked at my hands, those hands that have already cleaned wounds, made birthday cakes, paid for college, signed contracts without reading, and for so long only gave, without ever asking for anything in return. But now they were firm. And it wasn't to wash dishes, or to write a check. It was to change the course of history. I went straight to the office. I opened the folder where I kept all the documents I organized the previous week. I sat down and reread each line with the eyes of someone who was no longer in mourning, but in vigil. A new kind of wakefulness. I wasn't going to run after revenge. I was going to run after myself, of what was left of me after so much blind surrender. I took copies of the bank statements, printed reports, organized the papers in chronological order, a true dossier of my own absence. There were years and years of shopping that I didn't do, dinners that I didn't eat, trips that I only learned about later through social networks. Each line on the card was a reminder that I had been treated as a benefit, not as a mother. And now, if they wanted to question my sanity, I was going to show them what a lucid woman is capable of doing. I made a list. At the top of it, I wrote, Blanche Whitmore, 68 years old, widow, retired teacher, and, as of today, strategist. I called the law firm in downtown Raleigh, scheduled a consultation with an attorney who specializes in family estate and wills. I didn't tell you the details on the phone. I just said, I want to protect what's mine. And I want to do that while I can still look into the eyes of those who tried to take everything from me. I hung up and took a deep breath. I looked in the mirror in the hallway. For the first time in years, I saw in my face not the sadness of those who have lost their way, but the firmness of those who took the map back. It's curious, you know? There are moments in life when we think it's over, and that's exactly where we start. If this piece of my life can become a mirror or a hug for someone, will it help me to carry it forward? Like and subscribe here to the channel. This makes more difference than you might think. I still have a lot to tell. I went back to the table, took the diary, and wrote one more sentence. When a silent woman starts organizing paperwork, it's not a threat, it's a warning. And that same day, I decided to take the next step, to rewrite my will, not to leave anything bitter, but to make sure that, if one day I'm not here anymore, my silence keeps saying no. But it was at that very moment, when I thought I was one step ahead, that the doorbell rang. A blue envelope, sealed with a firm, was on the door. And what was inside? It was a new trap. Do you want to know what that document was? And who sent it? So follow me, because even I found it hard to believe. On the day of the appointment, I woke up earlier than necessary. I took a shower calmly, put on the same light perfume I wore when I was still teaching, and chose a simple navy blue blouse. But that left me with the feeling of being dressed up for something serious. I grabbed my briefcase, took one last look at the house, as if I was going out to one of those important meetings of yesteryear, and headed to downtown Raleigh. Coleman and Myers was housed in an old brick building with a quiet hall, and the smell of paper, coffee, and history. When the receptionist asked my name, I said, Blanche Whitmore. I have an appointment with Mr. Coleman. She smiled, recognizing the last name, and commented, Oh yes, he's already taken care of your will, right? I nodded. I had forgotten this detail myself until I picked up the briefcase the week before and saw my own signature on a document that said, basically, that everything I had would go to Ryan. Everything. House, savings, investments, even small things, like the jewelry that belonged to my mother. At the time, doing so seemed natural. I was a recent widow, and the only piece of family I had left was him. It never occurred to me that one day he might see me more as an anticipated inheritance than as a mother. When I entered the room, Mr. Coleman rose from his chair, greeted me with a firm handshake, and said, in that attentive manner of a lawyer who notices everything, Mrs. Whitmore, how long? You don't look the same as you did a few years ago. I smiled, a little embarrassed, and replied, I'm not the same either, doctor. He made me sit down, offered coffee, and then asked, What brings you here today? I took a deep breath and started counting. I didn't make drama. I didn't cry. I didn't increase anything. I spoke of the card delivered for a month and never returned. From the trips, the dinners, the subscriptions, to services that I didn't even know about. I told him about the phrase said in my own class, This old woman is only good for paying the bills. I told him about Ryan's laugh. I told him about the veiled letter insinuating that I might be mentally unstable. And I told him the final calculation, $86,000 over 5 years, without me being able to pinpoint a single moment when I had been treated as an essential person. When I finished, he was silent for a few seconds, flipping through some papers I had taken. Then he took off his glasses, looked me in the eyes, and said something that changed the way I saw myself. What you are doing is not revenge. It's protection. Those words entered me like medicine that we didn't even know we needed. For the first time, someone put a name on what I felt without calling me exaggerated, crazy, or spiteful. It wasn't drama. It was defense. And, looking at him, I thought something I want to share with you. Sometimes, The greatest courage of a mother is not to continue to endure everything in silence. It's finally deciding to protect yourself, even if it displeases those who have always been used to using her love. And that's why, if you can, stay with me until the end of this story, because the strongest point of it hasn't arrived yet, and I have the feeling that what I've lived through can illuminate a lot of things that you may have also swallowed in silence. Back to the office. He pulled out a copy of my old will and placed it on the table. There it was, in cold black letters, all for Ryan. No condition, no evaluation, no limits. I looked at that paper and it gave me a strange feeling, as if I was reading a letter written by another woman. The Blanche who signed that was the widow who still believed that being a mother was erasing herself for her children. Blanche sitting there in front of the lawyer was another. I want to change that, I said. I want my assets to stop being the guarantee of their wrong choices. He nodded, picked up a pen, and began asking, "Do you have anyone else in mind besides Ryan?" I talked about my older sister, who lived in another state, always independent, who never asked me for a penny, despite having gone through greater difficulties than mine. I also talked about an organization here in Raleigh that helps abandoned elderly, people like me, but who sometimes didn't get a chance to say no in time. I want some of what I've collected to go to those who really need it, not to fund Tesla, brunch, and a trip to the beach, I said, with a tired half-smile. We decided like this. A significant portion would go to these institutions of support for the elderly and local charity, another part to my sister, in recognition of her lifetime of dignified struggle, and to Ryan, only a conditioned portion. The rule was simple. He could only receive it if, at the time of my death, he proved a period of real financial independence, without using my accounts, cards, or guarantees. Is it possible to do that? I asked. Perfectly, replied the lawyer. It is your right to set conditions. And honestly, it's even an incentive for him to learn to get by with his own legs. As he typed the changes, I looked out the window at the movement of the street below. People walking, coming and going, solving their lives. And there I was, after decades, solving mine. Whether he wanted to or not, the feeling was of rebirth, even at the age of 68. It's never too late for us to go back to being the owner of our own history. When he handed me the new document for signature, I felt something different in my hand. It was not trembling with fear. It was firmness of choice. I signed each page as if closing a door that had been open for too long. At the end, Mr. Coleman put the papers together, stapled them, and said, "That's it. From now on, all of this here reflects who you are today. And again, I repeat, this is protection, not revenge." I left that office lighter, not because the problem was over, but because for the first time, I had a solid wall between what I am and what others think they can take from me. As I boarded the bus home, I sat by the window and watched the streets of Raleigh pass by slowly. An image of the small Ryan came to mind, sleeping in the backseat of the car, holding my finger with his small hand, and I thought, with gentle pain, I didn't fail to love. They are the ones who failed to respect. I did not know, however, that this new version of the will was going to be the trigger for an even more dangerous reaction. Because when someone who has always suckled from their goodwill realizes that the source can dry up for good, he doesn't give up easily. And the way they reacted when they heard that I had gone to a lawyer, that part still hurts to remember. Can you imagine how far a family is capable of going so as not to lose control of money that is not theirs? Well, that's exactly what I'm going to tell you in the next part. I returned home after the meeting with the lawyer with the feeling that I had turned a page, and at the same time, opened an entire book that I had never had the courage to read. I spread the documents on the table once again, wanting to review everything with now trained, more attentive eyes. It was then that I realized details that, before, due to naivety or emotional fatigue, I would never have noticed. I took one of the papers, an old bill for an additional card. In the signature field, my name but not my handwriting. Mine always had a long bow in the B of Blanche, an old teacher's way. That B was brusque, short, almost scribbled. I felt my stomach sink. I ran my fingers slowly, trying to remember when I had signed that. I didn't remember. And not remembering, for me, has always been synonymous with alertness. I kept looking at the other documents, and the more I read, the more the silence in the house seemed to get heavy. There were automatic debits I'd never authorized, subscription clubs for wines I didn't drink, a premium service for Dana's dog I didn't even know existed, app fees tied to trips to places I'd only seen in photos of them. Miami, Aspen, Palm Springs. There it was, black and white, what I had been afraid to admit for so long. It was not carelessness. It was standard. It was no exception. It was a system, and I was the fuel. I took all of this to Jonathan at the next appointment. He analyzed each sheet carefully, taking notes, marking dates, comparing signatures. When he saw the card with my supposed signature, he frowned. "Mrs. Whitmore," he said, with surgical calm, "this signature here, it does not correspond to the others. There are indications of misuse, maybe even fraud." I felt my throat close, not out of a desire for punishment, but out of a realization. It was as if someone turned on the light in a dark room where I already knew something was wrong. I just didn't want to see it. He continued, "It's difficult, but possible to prove, especially by the continuous pattern." I nodded slowly. "I don't want criminal prosecution, doctor. I don't want handcuffs. I don't want headlines. I just want to know that I wasn't crazy, that what I felt, it was real." He looked at me with a kindness that almost took me apart. "It was real, Mrs. Whitmore. Very real." I returned home with a reorganized folder, every debt numbered, every suspicious signature circulated. I sat on the couch, the same couch I bought 7 years ago, and placed the papers next to me. I looked at them as someone who looks at portraits of moments that he prefers to forget, and it was at that moment that an old memory crossed me, one of those that we don't realize we kept, but that comes back in one piece when we find the right trigger. I remembered Ryan, at the age of 15, asking me to sign a school permit. He stood behind me, putting the sheet on the table and saying, "Sign here, Mom, quick, I'm late." And I, busy, barely read it. He was my son, my boy. I trusted it. And I realized then that maybe that haste, that habit of giving me papers already positioned, had taught him something that I never wanted to teach, that my yes was automatic, that my signature was a mere detail. I paused, took a deep breath, and let the pen slip out of my hand. It's curious how powerful some memories are, how they come back full of sound, smell, light, and show that certain stories began long before the moment we thought they began. And if you who are listening to me there have any memory like this, good or bitter, share it here in the comments. Sometimes, opening a drawer from the past helps someone else understand theirs too. I kept reviewing everything until late. With each line found, a piece fitted. It wasn't an exaggeration. It wasn't an outbreak. It wasn't sensitivity. It was a collective habit, cultivated by both of them, fed by years of silence of mine. They normalized access to my money to the point that, perhaps, they really believed that none of it was wrong. That's it. This hurt more than any forged signature. I let them see me as a resource. I let myself be reduced. When I finally closed the folder, I felt the house colder, emptier, as if the truth had taken something from me, but at the same time made room for something new to enter. I got up, went to the window and looked at the dark yard. The wind passed through the leaves as if whispering, "You're not sleeping anymore." But as I stared at that silent night, not knowing how to explain why, I had the feeling that their war had not yet reached its peak, because those who depend on their money do not accept losing access so easily. And I was right, very right. The next day, an unexpected visitor knocked on my door and brought with him the gun they had chosen to use against me. Can you imagine what it was? Because when I saw it, my legs almost failed. I chose the quietest coffee shop in the North Hills because I knew that on that day, I needed 2 things that a home wouldn't give me: distance and steadfastness. I arrived at 8:45 a.m. and ordered only some chamomile tea and sat down by the window, where the morning light came in softly, but enough to illuminate every paper I had brought with me. When Ryan walked in, I saw from afar that he hadn't slept properly in days. Deep dark circles, disheveled hair, that posture of someone who is already on the defensive. He saw me and came walking fast, as if he wanted to take control of the situation before I said anything. "Mom, look, I came, because this is all getting out of control. Dana is crying every day. My mother-in-law is saying that you are unstable, and I'm being humiliated at work because of lunch at Bay Ridge. We need to stop this before it becomes something bigger. He spoke like someone who scolds, as if waiting for me to back down, as someone who still believed that it was enough to raise my voice to make me feel guilty. But I didn't move. He doesn't smile. I didn't try to calm anyone down. I just opened the folder slowly and placed the first extract on the table between us. The sound of the paper sliding caught his attention immediately. "Ryan," I began, my voice low but firm. "I didn't come here to discuss lunch. I came to understand." He frowned. "Understand what?" I pushed the extract closer to him. "Yes." He looked at the leaf, then at me, trying to hold the pose. "Mom, you know how it is. Digital subscriptions, automatic purchases. These things happen." I turned the page. "Then explain this signature to me. It's not mine." He stood still for a second. Then he laughed, but it wasn't a natural laugh. It was a nervous, weak laugh. Mom, it's just that sometimes you signed in a hurry. Don't you remember?" I opened another sheet, then another, and another, each one with values that he recognized even before I pointed it out. I saw his face slowly withering, as if the air escaped through the cracks of consciousness. "And this here?" I asked, without raising my voice at any time. "Wine club, service for Dana's dog, hotel payment in Palm Springs, concierge app." He ran his hand over the back of his head. "That's it. That's Dana who controls it. I don't even know these details, but I used it." He did not answer, and he never asked where the money came from. Silence again. The people around continued with their coffees, but there was a different silence in that corner of the coffee shop. A silence that is born when someone realizes that the truth is here to stay. Ryan tried to catch his breath from his own narrative. "Mom, you always helped us. I always said that everything was fine. He always paid without complaint. How is it that it has become a problem now?" I stared at him calmly, a calm that took me a lifetime to learn. "Because I always thought it was temporary, that you were trying to get up, that there was respect in what he asked of me, but there wasn't. There was use, Ryan, use." He opened his mouth to speak, but I interrupted him. "For the first time in years, I created you to be a man, not dependent." The phrase fell among us like a stone thrown into a bottomless lake. He recoiled back in his chair, as if he had been given an invisible blow. His eyes watered. I don't know if from shame or anger, maybe both. I didn't know you felt this way," he murmured, looking down at his hands. I didn't know because he never asked. I closed the folder. I just closed it. Because the conversation had ended there. The truth had already been told. I stood up slowly, adjusted the strap of my bag to my shoulder, and said the last thing I needed to say that day. "I'm not going to fund your life anymore, and you're going to have to learn to live yours." He continued to sit, inert, like a boy who loses his ground. I turned and started walking to the door. Each step felt like a decades-long liberation. There was no hatred in my chest. There was no revenge. There was only one end, a necessary end. But when I put my hand on the doorknob, I felt, almost like a presentiment, that it would not be easily accepted. And I was right, because that same night, something happened that showed them how far they would go, so as not to lose control of my money. Have you ever wondered what a family is capable of doing when they realize they can't use you anymore? Well, prepare your heart, because the next step they took was the cruelest of all. I came back from the coffee shop knowing there was no turning back, and that same night, I sat at the kitchen table with a simple sheet of paper, but one that would carry the weight of my entire history with Ryan and Dana. I did not write as a wounded mother, nor as a humiliated woman. I wrote as someone who had finally learned to stand up. I started with the basics. Ryan and Dana, I write to formalize what should have been understood a long time ago. My hands didn't tremble. My heart beat firmly, as if it were guiding me. I continued. From this date, no financial support will be granted. No loan, no payment, no advance. I made a point of making it clear that there was no anger, just a limit. I don't seek punishment. I seek peace. Then I added the phrase that I knew would hit them like an unexpected bell. There have been changes in the will. That's all they need to know. I did not explain details. I didn't give percentages. I did not reveal the conditions. Because I had already learned, information, when given to those who abuse, becomes a weapon. Fold the letter, put it in the envelope, calmly sealed it, and left it in the mailbox to be picked up the next morning. It was the first time in years that a decision of mine did not seek approval, just respect. The next day, the phone started ringing at 7:12 a.m. It was Ryan. I didn't answer. He called again, almost 20 times in a row. At 8 a.m., the messages began. First attempts at conversation. "Mom, what is this letter? Call me." Then came the justifications. "You can't just cut everything like that. We have responsibilities." Then attempts at manipulation. "I've always counted on you. Now are you going to turn your back?" And finally, the anger. "You're destroying our family. This is cruelty." I read them all. I didn't answer any. In the afternoon came Dana. Unlike Ryan, she didn't beat around the bush. "You don't have that right. My lawyer said we can challenge any change in the will if it is proven that you have been influenced or emotionally manipulated." She smiled to herself. Fine irony. Manipulation was what they tried to do at that very moment. Then came another message, minutes later, as if she had changed tactics when she realized that the first one had no effect. "Blanche, please, we need you. We are embarrassed. Don't you think about how it affects us?" I didn't answer, because for the first time I was thinking about how all that affected me. And then, something curious happened. As the hours passed, my house, which for months had seemed heavy, suffocated, full of ghosts of guilt and obligation, began to change its smell. Seemed bigger, lighter. I walked through the rooms and felt that the air circulated in a different way, as if the walls were finally giving me back the space I had given myself. I sat on the porch with a cup of tea and noticed that I no longer trembled when the phone rang. I even let him play in the silence of the room, without fear, as if it was just another sound and not a chain pulling at my ankle. There was no hatred in me. That I need to say. There was sadness, yes, that gentle sadness of those who bury the old version of themselves. But there was above all firmness, an almost spiritual firmness, as if something inside me, which had been dormant for years, had finally awakened. I still loved Ryan. It is not possible to undo the love that has been placed in a child, but I no longer allowed that love to hurt me, and that, for me, was the greatest liberation of my life. At night, while putting away the dishes, I heard the phone ring for the last time. I didn't answer. I let it play until it stopped. Then came a short voicemail, with only the sound of Ryan's heavy breathing before saying, "So this is how you want to do it?" I deleted it without hearing it until the end. Because yes, it was like that. Not out of malice, but because I had finally understood the price of continuing to give in, and I was never going to pay that price again. But despite this new peace I felt, something inside me knew that they wouldn't let it die there. People who get used to your silence don't take it well when you learn to speak. And people who get used to their money, they don't accept it when you close the door. I just didn't imagine that their next move would be so low, so calculated, and so cruel. The next day, when they knocked on my door with an unexpected visitor, I realized that the battle was far from over. Can you imagine who showed up here, sent by them, to try to get me to give in? Because when I opened the door, my heart stopped for a second. When I opened the door that morning, I found Dana's mother standing on my porch, holding an expensive purse, and a look trained to look worried, but who carried deep down the same arrogance that I had so often felt in the corners. "Blanche, we need to talk," she said, as if I were a child about to be warned. I invited her in, not out of cordiality, but because I wanted to look into the eyes of someone who thought I could bend. She sat on the couch, adjusted her coat over her shoulders, and began, "Look, honey, I know you're upset, but there are better ways to work this out. Ryan and Dana are going through real difficulties. Their rent is late, the car needs urgent maintenance, and they have nowhere else to get it from." I poured her a glass of water and remained standing. She continued, now in a tighter voice, "You've always been so generous, so understanding. It's strange to see you like this, hardened. The family is scared. Dana cried last night. I said you destroyed everything. I listened to every word with the patience that only age gives, but not with the guilt they expected. Instead, I clearly visualized what was happening in Charlotte. Bills coming in, late notifications, rising rates, luxurious living unraveling like makeup in the rain. For the first time, they were facing the world they had built with cards that were never theirs. When her mother finished her rehearsed speech, I just said, "They are not scared by my attitude. They are frightened by reality." She frowned, offended. "Don't you think you're being cruel?" I took an envelope from the table, handed it to her, and replied, "Cruel is waiting for a woman to pay so as not to be discarded." Inside the envelope, she found copies of a few old invoices. Just a few, enough to make it clear that I knew exactly what had been done. Nothing more than that. I didn't need to prove anything to anyone. It was enough to show that I was now awake. She was speechless. And for the first time, I realized that even she, who had always feigned neutrality, could not deny the abuse she had sustained with silence. Before leaving, he still tried the last card. "But, Blanche, Dana said you are family. Family does not abandon." I took a deep breath and replied, "Family doesn't explore." When she left, I closed the door and leaned against her for a few seconds, feeling not triumph, but serenity. I walked to the kitchen and made some tea, while the phone rang once again. I already knew what it was about. I answered, and on the other end, Ryan's voice sounded broken. "Mom, life is falling apart. You can't do that to us." "It can't." I listened in silence. His breathing was fast, desperate, like someone who was used to always having a safety net, my hammock, and who now felt the hard ground for the first time. "We can't pay the rent. Dana is freaking out. The car had a problem. Mother, for God's sake." He sobbed between sentences, but something inside me remained firm. "Ryan," I said, "you are living, for the first time, life within your means. This is not cruelty. It's reality." He tried to say something, but the truth caught his voice. When I turned it off, I sat on the porch and felt a warm breeze passing over my face. I thought about how many times I myself carried their despair, as if it were my own. Now finally, I let them hold the weight of adulthood that they never wanted to face. There are things that we live and keep, but maybe by telling, we help another heart to breathe. Enjoy this video and subscribe, and let's make this story reach those who need it. But there was something I didn't know yet, something that was about to happen and would prove that when despair strikes, some people have no limits. Can you imagine what they tried to do when they realized that the hole was deeper than they thought? Because what came next? It almost changed everything. I was sitting at my kitchen table, sorting through some mail, when I heard the sound of a car engine that I recognized from afar. It was theirs. I didn't have to look out the window to know. The hurried way of parking, the door slamming, the hurried murmur of voices. It was always the same pattern when they came here wanting something. I took a deep breath. It was no longer Blanche who ran to open the door. It was Blanche who was waiting, that he observed, that decided. When they beat me before as if the house was theirs, it consumed me. Now I just remembered that it was my home, and that I chose who entered. I heard the firm knock on the door, then louder, then a voice I knew so well. "Blanche, please. We need to speak." I didn't answer. Ryan also tried. "Mom, open it. It's serious." They stayed there for a few seconds, as if they expected me to give in by force of habit. But when the door didn't open, it was Dana who lost control first. She began to cry, a noisy, exaggerated, almost theatrical cry. "Blanche, I know I made a mistake. I know I said nonsense. Please let us talk." I don't know if it was the phrase, the tone, or the theatricality, but I realized that this was not the cry of regret. It was the cry of fear, from the drying pocket, of comfort slipping between your fingers. I approached the door, but I didn't open it. I just stood there listening. Ryan would say things like, "We're trying, Mom, but it's impossible." Dana sobbed too loudly, as if I could hear it even from across the street. And then, out of nowhere, everything went silent, as if they had both understood that I would only open the door when I decided, and that's exactly why I didn't open it. A minute later, I heard footsteps, lighter, slower, and then the familiar sound of the doorknob being tested, as if they could force their way in with enough insistence. That's when I finally spoke, without raising my voice, just letting my presence go through the wood of the door. "You don't need to come in to speak. I'm listening." The silence that came soon after was not empty. It was a full silence. A silence of those who realize that the person who always gave in is no longer there. Dana took a deep breath, and as if kneeling without bending the knee, said, "Blanche, please, I never meant to hurt you. I talk nonsense. I didn't think about it. I was nervous, you know how hard life is." I moved away from the door just enough to look out the side window. She was disheveled, with her mascara smudged, holding the bag against her chest as if it were a shield. Ryan was standing a few steps behind, his eyes red. I don't know if he was crying or angry. "I'm not here to discuss what you meant or didn't mean, Dana," I replied. "I'm here to see who you are when you have nothing left to take from me." She trembled. And in that instant, I realized a truth that I might have ignored for more than a decade. When someone loses power over you, the real face appears. "Please," she repeated. "We just need help until we stabilize. That's all." I took a deep breath. I remembered when she used the same phrase to justify the designer clothes, the trips, the electric car, the subscriptions that I didn't even know existed. "You confused generosity with obligation," I said, keeping my voice calm, firm, clean, "and love with convenience." She collapsed right there, on the doorframe. Ryan ran to her, but even he didn't quite know what to do. And at that moment, I realized that all his life he only knew how to exist when someone solved the problem for him. "Mom," he began, "don't talk like that. We made mistakes, but it's our family." I closed my eyes for a moment. I remembered all the times I was alone at Christmas while they traveled. From the waiter recognizing me as the mother of the golden card, even though I had never set foot in the restaurant. From the photographs I was never in, of the debts that were mine, but of the benefits that never came to me. And when I opened my eyes, the answer was ready. "Ryan," I said, "you need to learn what I learned too soon. No one grows in the lap of others." He tried to argue, but there was no more room for argument. Something broke in them at that moment, not the family bond that had been cracked for years. What was broken was the illusion that I would be there to cushion every fall, put out every fire, pay every desire. And for the first time since it all started, they saw that I wasn't going back. In the midst of that heavy silence, I felt something strange. Peace. A peace I hadn't known for years. And look, I'll confess one thing. Sometimes we only discover the strength we have when love stops being a crutch and becomes a border. But what happened a few days later? That was the real test of my courage, because I thought they had reached the limit. But their limit, I discovered, was much deeper than I imagined. Are you ready to hear what they did when they realized that I would not back down a step? The months that came after that day were like watching a photograph fade, and, at the same time, watching another take on color. It started slowly, almost silently, like the first leaves that fall at the end of summer here in Raleigh. Ryan and Dana called me less and less. Then they stopped calling. It wasn't reconciliation. It was too concentrated desperation to share with me. I learned from the family's corridors, those invisible corridors where news flows without asking permission, that they had to leave the apartment in Charlotte. Rent went up, the card accrued interest, and without someone to put out fires, their house became a slow flame that consumed everything. They went to live in a small apartment in Pineville, 2 bedrooms, of old construction. No gym in the building, no swimming pool, no hall with the smell of eucalyptus as Dana liked to show in the photos. I was also informed that the Tesla, the same one I paid the down payment for, believing it was necessary for their future, was sold in a hurry. In his place, they bought a used simple sedan, with the paint already tired. It was the car that fit in the life that was finally theirs, not mine. The trip ceased altogether. The photos of brunch, rooftop, brunch again, everything they posted religiously disappeared from social media. I found it curious, because deep down, that was never life. It was scenery. And a scenario without money is just an empty wall. Dana's mother-in-law also stepped aside. I learned that she was tired of paying for lunches, birthdays, small expenses that I used to cover myself without even knowing it. He said to a cousin, "They are not bad. They are just too easily used to it." But even her goodwill came to an end. Friendships of the couple. These evaporated like hot water. It's amazing how certain people only stick around while the glow is on. The day Ryan stopped sporting expensive watches, and Dana stopped posting photos with gold cups, was the day the "let's score something" messages stopped. I wasn't surprised. People like this don't move away. They just go back to the place where they've always been, far away. And while their lives shrank, mine expanded. I went back to taking care of my garden with an affection that I hadn't had for years. I planted lavenders next to the hydrangeas that John had picked before he left. At first, my hands trembled a little. It was as if I was asking permission to start over. But over time, The shaking turned to firmness. I started going to the Saturday market in downtown Raleigh. He tried fruits, talked to vendors, bought flowers just because he thought it was beautiful, and not because they had a discount. I attended 2 events at church, something I hadn't done since Ryan was little. I played the piano for an entire afternoon, out of tune as always, but happy as I hadn't been in a long time. And it's strange, but the house looks bigger, not because the physical space has changed, but because the weight has come off. That invisible weight that makes us walk bent over even when we are sitting. He is gone. At times, alone on the balcony, I found myself thinking about how our lives can be divided into before and after, without warning, and how sometimes losing someone to the truth is the only way to find yourself again. But the story doesn't end there, because even falling, Ryan and Dana still had one last card, and when she arrived, it made me realize that their fall would not be smooth, and that I still had to face something I didn't imagine. Do you want to know what they tried to do when they saw that nothing else worked? Do you want to know what was the last attempt to pull me back into the role I finally abandoned? I spent many years trying not to look back, trying not to revisit Blanche, who wrote everything down in blue notebooks. Not because I wanted control, but because I needed to convince myself that it made sense. But that afternoon, I sat in my office, opened the bottom drawer, and pulled out the stack of notebooks I hadn't touched since the day I said, enough. The first was yellowed at the edges. In it, the pages began with small lists. Ryan rental, $800. Dana clothes, $320. Emergency car, $900. Emergency. I laughed to myself. A low, tired laugh. I didn't even remember which of these emergencies was real. There were so many, and almost all of them invented or expanded to fit in my pocket. As I leafed through, I found phrases that I had written down myself so as not to forget. He promised to repay. I said it was only until I started the new job. He said he loves me. Words that used to calm me down, and that now only revealed the exhausted woman I was. There was a moment, in the middle of the notes, when I realized that I didn't record expenses. I recorded excuses. He recorded absences. I recorded little pieces of my dignity that I gave away, so as not to lose my place in their lives. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. I didn't feel angry. I didn't feel ashamed. For the first time, I felt compassion. But for me, for that Blanche who believed that love was always sacrificing something, I touched the worn cover and thought, if only I had someone to tell me at that time that love is also a limit, maybe I would have woken up earlier. But I didn't. And yet, I woke up. And you know, there is something deeply liberating about looking at one's past without apologizing for it. I understood there, at that table full of old papers, that my mistake was never to have loved too much. My mistake was to have confused love with the survival of others. It was to have believed that my presence was only valid as long as I paid something. If I could go back in time, I would have hugged that woman from yesterday and said, "You don't have to buy your place in the world, Blanche. It is already yours. It always has been." But life does not give back years. It restores consciousness. And that, sometimes, is worth more. I closed the last notebook with affection, as if closing a door that finally doesn't hurt anymore. And at that moment, I realized clearly. My victory was not to block cards, cancel accounts, or change wills. My victory was to unlock my own life. It was understanding that freedom does not come early, not too late. It arrives when we are finally ready to receive it. I got up, walked to the window, and looked at my garden. The lavenders swayed slowly, as if waving at me, and I felt such a calmness that it seemed to fill even the most forgotten corners of my soul. But as much as I was at peace, something still awaited me, something I hadn't anticipated, and that, in a way, would complete the cycle that I hardly knew I was living, because life, this lady full of surprises, still had one last move before lowering the curtain. And what happened next? It almost took my breath away. Do you want to know what knocked on my door? When I heard the cell phone warning vibrating on the balcony table, the sun was already setting behind the trees of Raleigh and dyed everything gold, as if the day had been brushed calmly. I opened the message unhurriedly. It was Ryan's. Short, almost shy. "Mom, we're fine. Thank you for everything. One day I want to talk, not to ask for anything, just to hear you." I read slowly. I let that text cross my chest like someone touching an old scar that no longer hurts. and for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel that urgency to respond at the same time. I closed the phone and rested my hands on my lap. It was not out of hardness, nor out of pride. It was by understanding. Time, when we finally learn to respect, responds better than any word we can write. I stood there, watching the sky change color, and I felt a peace so silent that it almost felt like music. I thought about everything I experienced, everything I let happen, and everything I recovered when I had the courage to say enough is enough. It's curious how, in the end, I didn't lose anything. I recovered. Today, I walk around my house lightly, cultivate my garden with purpose, and allow myself to wake up without fear of the phone ringing. Ryan and Dana are living their lives, facing the choices they've made, and I finally live mine. I discovered that love is not carrying adults in your arms. Love is teaching that each one needs to walk with their own legs, even when they stumble. And sorry. Forgiveness is not forgetting. It is to move forward without carrying weight. The great lesson that remained, and that I leave here for you who have heard me so far, is simple but profound. No one is forced to sacrifice themselves to be loved. The love that charges your soul is not love, it is debt. And we pay off debt. Love, we cultivate. Thank you for staying with me until the end of this story. Her company, even from a distance, made me feel less alone as I revisited these very intimate pieces of my life. If this story touched your heart in any way, leave a like. He arrives here as a warm hug, one of those that we feel even in our bones. And if you want to come back for the next coffee, subscribe to the channel. My house is cozier when you come back. Also, tell me which city you are watching from. I love to imagine where my words are finding shelter. And it activates the bell, my dear. That way you don't miss out when the coffee is brewed again. Now, if you're still here with me, don't go away yet. Listen to the next true story that will appear on your screen. Always remember, each wrinkle tells a story, and each story carries a strength. Watch the next video here on the channel with another incredible story.